Welcome. For those who don't know me, of course, Tracy Sykes, HR consultant here. There are 4 HR consultants in our area, so Josh, Michelle, and Darla are the other 3. So depending what job you interviewed for, you would have spoken to one of us at one point already. I'm going to be going through the Code of Conduct and Ethics with you first, and then Christina's going to take over and do staffing, and then I'm going to be back up here again to talk about performance. Get you a click. So, has everyone seen and signed this form as part of your package? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of nods, so that's a good thing. So this is the acknowledgement that you have read and understood the Code of Conduct document. Having said that, we want to make sure that you have a really good feel for what it involves and how it's going to work in your day-to-day lives, which is why we also include it within our orientation program to give you a better discussion on the topic. So, first off, question for you guys. So what do you think the purpose of the Code of Conduct is? Why does it exist? Why do we even have one? Okay, you guys need more sugar. Come on. Yes?
To give you a sense of direction on how to conduct yourself.
Absolutely. Anything else?
A reason to be fired.
Yeah. No, and that's true though. So here, we'll flip on and I'll talk a little bit. So there's kind of 3 main goals with it. So first is to set the expectations. So it's meant to outline for you what we expect of you as an individual, as well as the behavior of the organization in general. So this is all rooted in our values and our beliefs. And it also needs to adhere to the law, some of the general common sense business conduct stuff, as well as our internal policies and procedures. Oh, sorry. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you'll find on our website all the information around our values and our beliefs. The 2 key ones that I want to emphasize in here that form the basis for a lot of what we do is, first off, customer service. We are here to provide a service to our customers, and we want to excel at that. So everything we do is about providing effective and efficient service to them. And of course, at the heart of what we do as a business is mission zero. So the idea that there's no such thing as an accident and that all injuries in the workplace can be prevented. So that's kind of been the center point for everything that we do. So the second purpose is to provide a framework for your decision making. So what I mean by this is we want you to have information to help avoid or prevent putting yourself in a position that is going to compromise your ability to do your job, that's going to impact your reputation or the reputation of WCB as a whole. So while we can't provide you an all-inclusive list of everything you're going to face, we want to provide you with some general guidelines to give you a feel for what you need to keep in mind when you're doing your job, and also where to go for further assistance if you need it. So third and fourth, final one, as Valentine has pointed out, is all employees are responsible and accountable for their own actions. So while we want to do everything we can to support you to be successful, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that this is very serious and you could be subject to discipline and even termination of your employment based on breaches in the code. So again, when we're looking at that kind of thing, we're going to look at your actions in the light of personal integrity and how you have lived up to our standards and our corporate values and determine whether or not it's a match. So there are very different types of conduct that we have in the organization. So I'm going to go through kind of the basic ones that you'll find yourselves in. So first and foremost is speaking to members of the public, be it in the media or public presentation kind of setting. So again, unless you're authorized as part of your job to do that, so for example, if you're asked to speak at a WCB event versus, say, an unsolicited call from a member of the media, it's important to think about what you're allowed to do in your role and what you should be speaking to. And when in doubt, be cautious, especially with phone calls. I always recommend take a message, get the information, find out what they want, and then talk to your manager, or depending on the situation, you may want to contact communications directly and talk to them. Again, you need to be aware of how your comments reflect on WCB because you are acting as a representative of this organization. So again, we don't live in a bubble. There's a lot of public issues that go on from time to time. You need to be aware of what's going on around us and how that might be related to WCB or where that might come up as a question. And always, again, keep in mind how your comments could be perceived. So second and more likely for you guys is going to be dealing with customers and general members of the public making inquiries. So again, as I talked in the beginning with our values and beliefs, customer service is at the heart of what we do. We expect all employees to be courteous and professional with dealing with customers. Again, you also need to recognize the diverse background of customers that we're dealing with. So for example, in our ops areas, when you're dealing with people on claims, you're dealing with them at the most vulnerable point of their lives in some cases, and they're going through a lot. And so we always need to be mindful of that in our interactions with them and do what we can and commit and follow through on what we promise. Having said that, I always encourage people that there's two things to keep in mind with that. Within the limits of the services we provide, always, and we're going to talk about confidentiality later, but also we don't expect our employees to deal with abusive customers. There's an extent to which you need to deal with the public, but there is also a time where it's appropriate to end that contact. And so speak with your managers about what the expectations are within your work unit of dealing with abusive customers, what you're allowed to do, and what the escalation points for those are as well. Community service. So as an organization, we're committed to community service. We offer volunteer hours. I don't know if Cassie talked about that as part of the benefits, but basically we allot a certain amount of time that people can volunteer throughout the year. We encourage you to participate in a full range of those kinds of activities. Having said that, you need to make sure that it doesn't interfere with your job with us. In the performance of your duties, for example, if you're going to be out late, volunteering and now you're too tired to be at work the next day, or you're getting sick and can't attend work because of it, that's going to become an issue for us. Also, that you're not making use of any of our property or assets in order to do that volunteer work. And any time needs to be approved by your manager to miss work for those kind of activities. Political activity. Again, you're free to participate in political activity. Having said that, it needs to be very distinct and separate from your employment with us. Again, you need to think about perception here as well too. It's important that you are impartial in doing your duties with us. So if it's going to impact on that, that could be a problem. Again, you need to engage in those activities outside of work hours and can't use work assets for it. So again, talked a little bit about this already, but just touching on the fact that you need to be familiar with our IT policies, including our internet policy. All of our equipment is tended for official use only unless you have approval from your manager to use it for something else. Also, we have the right to access and review all of your communications, all your records and information that you're producing with us. So your WCB email address is WCB's property. So anything that flows through there, we have a right to access and review. So just make sure everyone has fair warning on that. So oftentimes what you find yourself in with the code is a potential for what's called a conflict of interest. And so we have a very official sounding definition up here, but at its heart, what it means is that you need to be free from personal bias or benefit. So what that means is that you need to be objective in the decisions that you make, and you can't gain an advantage through your knowledge of WCB. So again, we talk about conflict, not only in actual conflict, but how it could be perceived by others as a conflict, so real or imagined. So to break this down a little bit more, the three kind of key points with it is the confidentiality of information. So we have a responsibility to protect the confidentiality of other people's information. We also can't gain a benefit from it. So you can't take that confidential information and get an advantage by knowing it. You also need to be impartial in your decision making, which can be complicated when you have relationships with other people. You also have to declare any self-interest. So if there's something that is going to put you in a conflict or could be perceived by others as a conflict, you have an obligation to speak up, preferably before you find yourself in that conflict. So can anyone think of a situation that might place themselves in a conflict?
No claimant.
Absolutely. Knowing a claimant is a big one. Any others that come to mind? So quiet this morning. Okay, so I'm going to go through a bunch of situations with you. So the first is receiving business gifts or hospitality. So just to clarify the distinction here. So for example, if I'm invited to present on behalf of an HR topic at a conference, I might be given a small thanks for coming out and presenting, they give you a t-shirt, a mug, or whatever. Small little things like that for doing something of that nature isn't what we're talking about here. It's things that are over the top, and you know the difference. Like if somebody suddenly gave me a pair of Pats tickets for coming up and presenting, that's kind of over the top, right? So it's about making sure that that gift isn't meant to sway you or influence your decision making or an outcome, or that the gift is really extravagant compared to what the service or thing that you have done is. Anything where you've been put in that position, you should let your manager know what you received or any concerns you have with it, and then between the two of you, you can make the decision about what's appropriate to do with that gift. Outside employment. So again, there are times where people are working other jobs besides working for WCB, and that's fine. Again, provided that it doesn't impact your ability to be at work on time, to consistently attend work, and that you're not doing that outside work while you're here. So again, in order to ensure that, you need to declare any outside employment to us. Also from a conflict position, that if the other company that you work for has clearances, WCB claims, or any interactions with us as a business, we need to make sure that you're separated from doing any work on that file. So you need to let your manager know. I recommend you do it in writing, in an email, or however you want to do that. And then they will let you know whether or not you have approval to work for that outside employer and what provisions they're going to put in place to make sure that you're not in contact with that employer. Working with relatives. So this can take on two kind of avenues. The most common one, of course, is relatives or close family members or friends who are WCB claimants. So it's inappropriate for you to work on a file that involves a relative. Again, the perception of impartiality on making any decisions around to that file. So it's important that you disclose that kind of a relationship right away if you find yourself in it. You're also not allowed to disclose any confidential information about your work to a family member or a friend. So for example, I know there's often a desire to take our work home and talk about things, but if you're dealing with a case, that confidentiality extends past the workplace into your personal life. Similarly, if we have a relative who is working for the company here or working for one of our vendors or consultants, we need to make sure that you're not in a position to influence their work or make any kind of business decisions. So you need to let us know right away so that arrangements can be made to separate you from that work. It does happen on occasion that you can develop feelings for a client. So if you find yourself where you're crossing the line over a friendship with a claimant or a guardian of a claimant, and it's now becoming a more personal relationship, you need to let us know right away. And again, the same thing applies. We're going to need to look for ways to separate you from that claim or that situation so that we can maintain impartiality with it. The other thing, of course, that comes up is, unfortunately, sometimes we have WCB employees who themselves become injured workers. So we have provisions in place that whenever a WCB employee becomes injured, members of their own team cannot handle that claim. It will go to another team, and if possible, another location, to create that separation and ensure that their claim is handled impartially. Employees should never, and I'm going to repeat it again, never attempt to access your own WCB claim files. That is a clear violation, okay? So again, you shouldn't have any more access than a member of the public would have to their own information. So again, we talked a bit about organizational assets, and I know everybody's mind automatically goes to your email, your IT, all that stuff. But again, getting back to what I was just talking about, employees should never have more access than a member of the public does. So for example, members of the public requesting a clearance can't just walk up to the 4th floor and ask for a clearance to be printed for their company. Neither should you. You need to go through the same channels a member of the public would have to go through to get those clearances. Same with access to your WCB file or contacting your case manager. It's not appropriate to walk over to the next team and go speak to your case manager about your file. You need to go through the appropriate channels, make the phone calls, set up the meetings, and again, dealing with that on your own time. So, I've talked a little bit about the types of conflict. If you find yourself in that position, again, you need to disclose that right away. And the sooner, the better. If we find out there's a conflict and you haven't come forward, the consequences are going to be more severe than if you come and disclose it. A lot of stuff can be avoided if we just know well in advance. Again, new employees who've just been hired, you've signed that agreement, you should be declaring everything right now that could potentially put you in conflict. If at any point your situation changes in the future, The minute that changes, you should be letting your manager know. And again, I recommend in an email or in writing. When in doubt, disclose. It's always better to be safe and find out that it's not an issue than not disclose something and find out that it is. So again, throughout my presentation up to this point, I've talked a little bit about confidentiality. Again, we hold this very dearly here at WCB. Again, HIPAA is one of the governing things that we deal with. As an organization, we have privy to a lot of information about individuals, including their financial history, their medical history. All that information you have an obligation to protect and to keep that safe and secure. Again, if you're acting with integrity and you're following confidentiality guidelines, you're going to be good. So I don't want to scare you, but at the same time, you always need to have those factors in the back of your mind with everything that you're doing. So as long as you're not divulging any of that information to someone outside of WCB, unless you've received consent and authorization to do that, you're okay. But having said that, a breach of trust of that nature is significant, and it can result in discipline up to the point of termination of employment. So think about the kind of information you have access to and kind of the types of information that you need to keep confidential. Again, it's going to differ from role to role, but it's important to kind of have that in mind, and so you can be aware as you're talking to people or dealing with people what you can talk about and what you can't. So there's kind of the 3-test rule that we always suggest to people when you're kind of deciding it's something in the gray area and you're not quite sure. Look at a couple things. So look at our values first. Does it align with the values? Is it something that's reflective of those pieces? Then look at the reasonable person test. So laying out your case, all your facts in front of somebody, what would a reasonable person, a member of the public, looking at that say is right or fair or what you should have done? And if it meets that, you're probably okay. The last is the credit test. So if everybody in the organization, if you were standing up here and we were telling, oh, look what so-and-so did, here's everything that happened, would you want credit for that, or would you not want that discussed in front of the group? And if it's not in front of the group, then chances are it's something you shouldn't be doing, or you at least need to be checking in with your manager to make sure you're in line. So again, when in doubt, ask. Ask your manager, ask a director, ask the executive, ask HR. You're more than welcome to call us with those kind of questions. Depending on what the situation is, if it's a case of, you think someone's committed fraud, or it's something to do with email, or it's something to do with the media, you may want to go directly to, say, internal audit, IT, or communications, or the department responsible for it. And also it's important to review the related policies that exist out there. So just a high-level list of them. So, of course, we have a diversity policy, so speaking to respect for individuals in the workplace as well as our customers. Again, respectful workplace policy gets into workplace harassment from members of the public, so that's where you're going to find a lot of that information. Workplace safety and security policy, so I know Gail was out here yesterday, so would have talked to you a lot about those pieces. There's also the social media guidelines, drug and alcohol in the workplace, and whistleblower legislation. So I'm going to touch on those last 3, the most important of which, of course, is social media guidelines. And this is so big because it's just a booming industry. So again, regardless of whether your comments are made inside of your work hours or outside of your work hours, you always have to assume that your coworkers, your clients, our stakeholders, members of the public are all going to see these comments. And I know that a lot of times I hear, well, but it was my private comment on Facebook. I didn't know someone was going to see it, or I deleted it right away. Here's the problem. The minute that post goes up, it's electronic, it's out there, and it's in writing, and you have no control over it. You can take it down, but you have no idea who copied it before you did or where it went after that. So once it's up there for good. And if that comment surfaces even a year later, it's as fresh as if it happened yesterday. It doesn't matter, it's in writing. So be very mindful of that before you hit post on anything that you put up in the public. Again, the other comment I hear is, well, that was just my personal opinion. That wasn't about WCB. That was just my thoughts. Well, here's the thing. Anybody who can search your name, our government directory has everybody's names, job titles, and where they worked listed on it. It doesn't take more than 2 minutes for somebody to figure out your work for WCB. So even though you maybe don't intend it to be connected, it doesn't take much for most people to connect your employment with us. So you always have to view that it could be perceived as your comment as a WCB employee. So having said that, Again, not trying to scare you or tell you you can't go out there and comment and post on social media. Just be careful that what you say is not expressed as a view of WCB and couldn't be perceived that way. So you always have to take that second glance at it and look, if one of my customers or clients saw this and knows I work at WCB, how would they react? And keep that in mind before you hit post. So, in terms of acceptable usage, again, you can use personal online activity during your coffee break, over your lunch hour, before or after work, not during work time. Having said that, you access any of that stuff at work, you need to be aware that all of your site activity is tracked in IT. And so reports can be run, we can see what sites you accessed, when you accessed them, and your manager can discipline on that basis if you're doing it during work time. So something to be aware of. Again, you should never use a WCB email address for anything personal or any of our logos, symbols, signatures, any of that information. You need to make sure that any of your public communication is consistent with our values and our policies. So things like respect in the workplace, diversity, the code of conduct, stuff we've already talked about. So just at a very high level, drug and alcohol use, of course, strictly prohibited within the workplace during work hours. So again, won't spend a lot of time on that today. That's pretty standard across organizations. But want to touch on whistleblowing language a little bit. So of course, if you become aware of something where you feel someone has contravened the law, is a threat to public safety or public health, has inappropriately used funds of the WCB, or has breached our policies, you have an obligation to raise that issue. And you can raise it in confidence with your manager, or you can come directly to HR. Either is fine. Having said that, if you raise those issues in good faith, you will be protected from retribution within the organization. To the extent that we can, we will maintain your confidentiality. And again, there are some limits on that, and when you come forward, we would discuss what those limits might be. Again, if we're getting into a case where somebody is being prosecuted by the police, you're going to have to talk to the police. There's no way around that. Again, if an employee is found to be acting in bad faith, though, they've raised this stuff to try and harm or discredit someone or get them in trouble, and it's found to be fabricated, you can be subject to discipline as well for that. So just so you know, all of our policies and procedures can be found on MyWCB. Again, Kathy gave you a very energized response to the website. I will give you a little promote on it too. Everything is there. If you ever have trouble finding it, just ask somebody, or by all means call HR. We can direct you to where to find the documents. But all that information is there, and sorry, click. That's okay. So just to wind down again, so the few things to remember: everybody is responsible for their own actions. You need to be familiar with the code as well as the consequences for failing to follow it. Again, I've said perception repeatedly through this. You need to consider that. Real or not, it's about how people perceive your actions. And again, as long as you're acting with integrity and honesty, you should be fine. But if you're in doubt, ask the question. And again, if your circumstances change, you need to report that to us as well too.